The importance of your kit when fishing for pike can be just as important as fishing safely. What you use and how you use it could determine whether a specific pike can be fished for and caught in that same spot again. In this chapter, we look at the importance of your rig, unhooking mats and nets. Plus, we take an in-depth look behind the scenes at a lure rig in action.
Now we're deploying a various array of different tactics, and we'll show you some of the rigs etc. we're using in the faint hope that we'll manage to trick one of these pike into making a mistake today. One of the facets of my fishing, if you like, is that the whole of my kit probably costs about 10% of what some other anglers up and down the country does. I use what works. These pike floats, I've got them off of eBay. I think they're probably about 80p each. You could go into a tackle shop and happily they'll sell you one for 3 or 4 quid, but it's entirely unnecessary. The pike has no idea what the float cost, so for me it's just what works. What I'm doing on this method's a drift float. Again, you can buy them from tackle shops. They're a few quid, a fiver perhaps, but I tend to make my own up out of a bit of boom tube. And I've done so here today particularly because of how shallow we're fishing. I'll run through the rig again then. What we've got mounted this time is a small mackerel, which pike pretty damn fond of. Caught some pretty big fish on mackerel, particularly this year. I've not got my bead behind the bottom treble there. I've just got a fixed trace here because I made up some unusual ones out of particularly finer wire I was experimenting with. The orange flag that I've attached to the top treble there is just a visual enhancer. A pike hunts predominantly by sight, and anything that you can add to your bait to make it more visually impactful, make it stand out a little bit more, I think on occasions can give you the edge. And this one's a drifter rig. So I've made this bait neutrally buoyant. I don't know if you can see in the back there. I've just inserted a bit of black balsa just so that the bait will be just sort of dangling loosely and buoyantly in the water. It's got a neutral buoyancy. The reason I'm using balsa as opposed to some other synthetic or man-made material is because it's balsa wood is digestible. So should this bait be lost and a bird picks it up, it's not going to suffer any of the ill effects. And the same thing with our beloved pike. If the pike swallows this bait, should it become discarded or detached from the hooks, it's going to inflict no harm on the pike at all because it can digest a bit of balsa wood just as readily as it can digest the fish. My trace then is a good 18 inches, perhaps 20 inches this trace, attached to the line further up by a snap link, and I'm only fishing the length of this trace deep because I want this to skip through the 3 foot of water and hopefully just sort of hover over the top of some lilies or weeds that the pike will be laying up in. Now we know they're laying up today because they're not feeding, and we also know there's a lot of pike out there. Don't ever think just because you're not catching that they're not there. They lay dormant a great deal of the time. Pike are not feeding 24/7, and quite often you need to just deploy a little tactic perhaps like this to trick them into having it. So I'll move on to the float. I mentioned that I've made this one myself. Just add a bit of rigid boom tube. Got one of the ET poly eggs on there because they're absolutely perfectly made for the job. And I've fitted my lead to the end of the boom tube so that this float itself is self-cocking. When it's out there, that's cocking, and the vane catches the wind and will utilise the wind to just get the bait out and cover in as much water as possible. Particularly if you cast these across the wind and you get a belly in the line and grease the line too, you can get quite a bit of travel on that and cover quite a bit of water, and thus cover quite a few different fish hopefully. Stop knot is sliding, just tied out of the same material, a bit of braid on there, and could be moved to alter the depth so that obviously you can fish deeper and move it back, of course, fish shallower. That's a pretty unusual rig, particularly for fishing on here, because more often than not people would just be fishing a float, but I favour the drifter. My PB came on a drifter, and I'm rather hoping we pick something up on it today. I'll get this one back out because I think this is probably our best option. Now I've cast that across the wind like I mentioned, and then I've kicked a bit of line off so that we've got a little belly in the line, and that should just work its way around there for us, down towards those reeds, and hopefully the home of a lazy pike today.
There are elements of rigs which make things more efficient, and sometimes when you've got a pike in the net, for example, you want to get the rod out of the way. And many years ago I started using these. I've never seen anybody else use them apart from Watto, who copied it off me. But if you want to focus up on that, these are a bit of sea fishing kit, and they are for sea match fishing. You've got it there. And that's how easy it is to take the trace off. Okay. The other thing I do with my tracers is I don't use a swivel there, because why do you want two swivels? You've got a swivel there already. Right, you've got a swivel on the end, and then use a quarter lead clip. So if I want to use a fixed lead, I can do that very simply by clipping a lead onto that. Usually, I have lead on the trace, but there's no point having two swivels, so I just make a loop, usually double crimped. That's a single crimp. I normally double crimp them. And it goes on like that, and it comes off like that. Doesn't happen when you're playing a pike, because the line is always tight. So that makes it simple. You've got the pike in the boat here like that, rod's in the way, all you've got to do, rod's out of the way. It's that simple. And it just makes it easier. Then all you've got then is the trace and the pike, and it makes it a lot easier to unhook them.